We're live.
Okay, awesome. Okay. Hey everyone, welcome back to Pearlman and Pearlman webinar series. It is April 1st. I'm Michelle Pearlman. I'm a gastroenterologist and physician nutrition specialist.
And I'm Amy Pearlman, urologist and men's health specialist.
So we are going to talk today about how you can use food to boost your immunity. Are superfoods really super? Amy, what do you think about that?
I don't know. Why don't you tell me?
So it is happy hour. What time is it? It is 6:18 on April 1st. So let's get going. So when we talk about COVID-19, our current modes that everyone is so focused on are really trying to reduce the risk of infection and spread. So how are we doing that? Well, we're self-isolating, we're social distancing, we're washing our hands with soap and water, and we're trying not to touch our face as hard as that can be. And most people's reaction when they're self-quarantined is that they just start craving tons of food. So even if people were never really a sweetaholic where they would have candy and cupcakes, as soon as you walk into that grocery store, you're literally bombarded with all of those baked goodies. And particularly when we're stressed or we're anxious, we tend to go to those comfort foods. And so when I watch people with the food that's in their cart, the majority of the food in people's carts these days is really processed stuff. Amy, have you noticed that too in Iowa?
I feel like I notice that all the time in general. I mean, that stuff is good. It tastes good.
Yeah. So, instead, well, in addition, I would say on trying to prevent the risk of spread and getting the virus, we also want, in case we do end up getting the virus, that we want to make sure that we can mount an immune response and survive the virus. So that's so incredibly critical. But the problem.
Well, and Michelle, just a really brief thing.
Yeah.
All of these, radio segments, TV segments, everything on the news is saying, well, what can we do to prevent the spread? What are the external factors that we can do? When part of it is, well, what about the internal factors? How do we optimize our internal ability to fight infection?
And that's a really interesting point because there is no focus on that.
Yeah.
There is no focus on that. We're talking about PPE equipment, but we're not talking about things that we have 100% control over.
Right. We're talking about chronic medical conditions, prior diagnoses, but how do we treat those diagnoses as we're going through this to optimize the control of our diabetes and our high blood pressure and our lung disease?
Yeah, so the big hot topics are like our NSAIDs. Are those a risk for worse outcomes? Or if you're on an ACE inhibitor, because the virus has to do with that, what's the word? ACE inhibition, I guess, that pathway. People are worried that, oh, if I'm on an ACE inhibitor for my heart, do I need to stop that? So there's focus on the pharmaceuticals and there's focus on the PPE equipment, but no one's actually talking about the nutrition component, which is kind of fascinating. So instead of focusing 100% on the PPE and things that we may or may not have that much control over, what we can focus on is actually what we're putting in our body. So some key concepts is that the same principles that apply to proper eating after any stress in the body, whether it's just the common cold, COVID-19, or recovery for an athlete, today is no different than any other day. And I think that's not really something that people think about, because it's yes, an added stress to our body, but it's just like any other stress. So my pearls of wisdom tip number one is it all comes down to eating real food. As unsexy as that sounds, that's really the nuts and bolts of this. But people want to know, is drinking coconut water or eating a lot of acai berries or chugging down the apple cider vinegar, is that going to keep me from getting the virus? Probably not. But it's a lot simpler if we just eat real food and kind of just start from there. And unfortunately, that's very difficult for the majority of people. So experiment in the kitchen, my hashtag get creative. You do not have to eat tons of processed food, the frozen TV dinners, the pizza. Amy, what do you have in your grocery cart that's processed? Anything? You know, the Halo ice cream, the types of things.
I bought that yesterday or 2 days ago. But today I was chewing on some raspberries and blackberries, but I did have a protein bar earlier today. That's processed.
Yeah, it's processed. And as much as they want to say, oh, it's non-GMO and organic and, you know, added protein. Well, you can call anything a protein item. You can call a Snickers bar a protein bar if they add a couple grams of protein to it. And that's what a lot of these protein bars and granola bars are. You know, a lot of the granola bars are just oats covered in sugar, and a lot of the protein bars are fake ingredients covered in chocolate, and they add a couple grams of protein and they say, eat me unhealthy, I'm a protein bar.
Yeah, I pretty much ate a Snickers bar this morning, but it was low carb.
Exactly. So, you know, let's keep things simple here. It doesn't have to be complicated. You can just choose either fresh or frozen. There's nothing wrong with frozen food. As long as you're getting the frozen food that's plain, like the steam bags, things like that, where it's just the plain vegetables, you pop them in the microwave, and then you can add your own seasonings or sauces to it. But that way you're in full control over what you're putting in. You're not at the mercy of whatever's already in the bag. And then you can freeze your leftovers, experiment with seasonings. And my biggest thing here is really experiment with the type of food preparation, because people tend to get bored if they're just constantly grilling their food. But you can open up the boxes that have a lot of dust collected from the holidays. Use your air fryer, use that Instant Pot, your slow cooker. You can bake, you can roast, you can saute. All these different cooking preparation methods will change like the flavor and the texture of the food and increase the variety, even if you're just sticking to your staple fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, I would say the air fryer is one of the best things I ever did for myself.
Yeah, and so a lot of people, if they want, let's say, like a fried chicken type texture, instead of using breadcrumbs, you can play around with it and actually use like coconut flour or almond flour. And you can add like an Italian seasoning, whatever seasoning you want, and some egg whites or egg beaters as your binder. And you actually use that to coat like the chicken or the fish to give it like a crust instead of the breadcrumbs. So Amy, can diet help strengthen the immune system? Do you think superfoods are really super? You're not sure?
No, well, I certainly think diet can strengthen the immune system, especially if we look at food as medicine. Mm-hmm. But I'm not entirely sure what you mean by superfoods. If you mean like the gimmick of the superfood, or if we're saying like real food, is that helpful?
Exactly. Like Kombucha. Great segue. So a lot of medical professionals don't use the term superfoods. I had actually never really heard of it until more recently. So why is that? It's a sexy marketing term. It's rampant all over social media. And it really just comes down to, what is a superfood? It's food that confers health benefit because it has a lot of nutrients and antioxidants. That's what it is. It is nothing new. It's the same foods that have been present for centuries, and now they're just glamorized. So it's the things like blueberries or acai berries or flaxseed, turmeric, agave, you know, the list goes on.
Avocado.
Exactly. But these are nothing new, but they like to use these terms superfood because it's a marketing gimmick. So if I have a super green powder that has, you know, 10 different herbs in it, like spirulina, things like that, I can call it like a super green powder, and that sounds sexy, but it's really nothing new.
Yeah, it sounds super.
So a key point here is that consuming a superfood daily will never cancel out an otherwise poor diet rich in processed ingredients like high sugar and saturated fat. So Amy, stop chugging down that apple cider vinegar before you have your pastry.
What if I just eat the pastry and not the apple cider vinegar? Where are we at with that? You feel Mom?
But I see this all the time, particularly with my weight loss patients. They'll tell me I have a big glass of water and then I chug down some apple cider vinegar and I feel like I'm going to throw up, but then I'm not hungry for a couple of hours. And they literally have to force feed themselves, you know, very pungent type liquids to make them nauseated so that they're no longer hungry. Have you ever tried apple cider vinegar?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, with the mother. I mean, it's an acquired taste, shall we say. So my other question I'm going to pose to you, Amy, is should I be taking mega doses of vitamin C and antioxidants?
No.
Why?
Because if we eat the right foods, we don't need to endure that extra cost, and we can get it from actual food where we can get a combination of what would be helpful in our bodies rather than mega doses of specific things.
Yeah, so people take mega doses of supplements in order to theoretically protect against sickness, but it's really not as simple as just taking mega doses of one antioxidant or a combination of those. And the problem is that we have a lack of randomized controlled trial data actually evaluating the efficacy of supplementation on certain clinical outcomes. So the research is really not out there. And why is that? Well, the population is very heterogeneous, so it's very different. So, and it depends on the clinical outcome. So if I'm going to say, if I want to test to see, is taking 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day going to lower my risk of developing a cold? Well, that's a study question, but there's so many other factors involved because I'm not taking into account the rest of the food that I'm taking in the rest of the day. Right? So that could be a huge confounding factor. And the problem is that most nutrition studies, the first thing is it's very difficult to get them funded because who's going to fund these? It's not going to be a pharmaceutical industry.
Right, because they're not making any money off of vitamin C.
So they're not going to test, what is the effect of avocado on the immune system. There is no money in that. So the biggest issue is funding. But the second issue is that it's very hard unless you're doing an animal study where you can 100% control what you're feeding the rats. I can't control unless I, put you in a jail cell, what you're eating 100% of the time. So a lot of these dietary studies are based on recall. And the majority of people can't remember what they ate in the past 24 hours, yet we're basing a lot of scientific data on those dietary recalls. So that's, one of the major issues in general, why nutrition studies are quite difficult to interpret. So people will give you anecdotal advice and tell you, oh, I took a bunch of, vitamin A, vitamin D, whatever it may be, and I felt better. But remember, that's just anecdotal. Maybe they also changed their nutrition during that time because they were just being more mindful of what they were eating, and who really knows if it was that supplement. So vitamin C tends to get all the fame because they market really well. You see commercials all the time for Emergen-C. And when I actually pulled up, and this is nothing against Emergen-C, this is just an example, but when I pulled up the supplement here, so they, have fresh oranges all over the bottle, and they have Immune with vitamin D, and it looks very natural and it looks very fancy, lots of bright colors. So the marketing team gets paid a lot of money to create the colors and everything to really attract the consumer. And then when you look at the supplement facts, so there's 45 calories for 3 gummies, and there's 7 grams of sugar. This isn't natural sugar, it's added sugar. So it's literally like table sugar because it's a gummy. So you're getting not only the vitamin C, but you're also getting 7 grams of sugar. So you're actually kind of eating candy.
Yeah. And they taste like candy. I mean, I used to take gummy multivitamins and they were delicious. I almost felt like I overdosed on them one time.
Exactly. So what's also interesting here is the vitamin C has 750 milligrams, which is almost 1,000% of what your recommended daily allowance is. Okay. And then it's mixed with B6, B12, biotin, zinc, manganese, etc. Okay. But the interesting thing is when you look at the ingredients list, the first ingredient on there is sugar, then glucose syrup. So the first 2 ingredients are actually sugar.
And then water.
Exactly. And then a bunch of other things, natural flavors. I mean, I don't even know what that means. And sodium citrate. So there's other preservatives and additives in it that can sometimes cause intolerances for people. So I ask you this question, is more always better? So we hear all the time, is bigger better, Amy? Is that true, false?
Sometimes, and I would say more is sometimes better.
Okay.
Sometimes not.
Exactly. Yeah. So in this regard, some data actually suggests that mega doses of vitamin C actually then acts as a pro-oxidant. So we often, take vitamin C as an antioxidant, but in mega doses, some data suggests the opposite, that it can actually increase risk of certain cancers because it can actually cause oxidative damage. So when we look at the supplement, this one in particular, it had 750 milligrams of vitamin C. But when you actually look at the recommended daily allowance of vitamin C, it's 90 milligrams in males and 75 milligrams in females. So Americans overall have the most expensive urine in the world. So what do I mean by that? Well, vitamin C is water soluble. So are your B vitamins and a bunch of others. And so when people take in mega doses of the water soluble vitamins, you just urinate all the excess out that your body doesn't need. And so people spend a ton of money on these supplements when in fact their body's probably not using the majority of the supplement. You also have to be careful with your fat soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, because those are fat soluble, so they actually get stored in your fat. And if you take excessive doses of those, they can actually lead to additional toxicities. So particularly in this case, more is not always better. So really, it just comes down to eating the fruit. You eat the orange, you get all the RDA that you need for your vitamin C. You get thiamine, folate, potassium, citric acid, which can help prevent kidney stones in some folks. You get dietary fiber, which you don't get in the gummy. You do get, probably like 7 or 10 grams of sugar, depending on how big the orange is. But that's natural sugar. It's not added table sugar. And then you're also getting antioxidants like your carotenoids and your phenolics. So there's a lot of things that you're getting in this orange that you're not getting in that, man-made gummy. So I really think that even though vitamin C gets all the spotlight, it really needs to share the spotlight because it's a whole team of vitamins and minerals that really help you and protect your immune system.
Like you and me, a team.
A team, exactly. Perlman and Perlman. So other micronutrients that influence the immune system include zinc, selenium, iron, copper, vitamins A, C, E, and many of the B vitamins. And another thing that I really want to focus on here is that when you eat fruits and vegetables in their natural form, that's really ideal because you have the normal ratios and percentages of those certain micronutrients that your body knows how to use to help boost your immune system. But when you make a man-made gummy that has, 800% of vitamin C, 200% of another vitamin, those are not natural ratios. And when you have excess of one, that can actually interfere with absorption with another. So for instance, when you take calcium and iron together, the absorption can actually interfere with one another. When you take vitamin C with iron, the vitamin C actually increases the absorption. So if you can imagine if people have issues with iron overload and they take tons of vitamin C, with, let's say, a multivitamin that contains iron, or with lots of green leafy vegetables and animal products that have a lot of iron, as you can imagine, that can actually worsen their iron overload state and lead to liver disease. So we don't think about these things. If you just ate the food, it's often not a problem because you're not getting mega doses.
Well, and people, I think, don't necessarily think of vitamins or over-the-counter supplements as pharmaceuticals. Yeah. We think of them as nutraceuticals. Oh, there's no way they're going to harm me. Like, I don't even need a prescription for it. Yeah. So we don't even understand how a lot of these things can actually lead to detrimental side effects simply because we don't need a prescription to obtain them.
Exactly. And I think the other key thing here is that just because something is natural does not mean it's healthy. Mm-hmm. So dirt is natural. I do not tell people to eat dirt.
You told me to eat dirt before.
Arsenic is
not literally.
It's natural. I do not give arsenic to people. So just because something is natural does not mean it's going to be healthy
or that you should eat it.
Exactly. So, it's very difficult to play catch up once you're ill. Okay. So once you have a bad stress on your body, that tends to deplete a lot of these essential vitamins and minerals, including vitamin C. So if you started where you were, even if you're overweight or obese, many folks are actually still malnourished, because even though you may be consuming excess calories, if the calories you're taking in don't have nutrients, you may be consuming 3,000 calories in a day, but you're not getting your recommended daily allowances of the essential vitamins and minerals, okay? So if you start out low in certain vitamins and minerals, and then you get a stress, whatever that may be, now you're starting 10 steps behind the ball here. And so then people will then say, oh, I need to catch up. I need to take mega doses of vitamin C because I want to help get over this. But if people would just eat real food on a daily basis to help maintain those normal levels, then they wouldn't be so easily depleted during a stress. And again, that's hard for people, but it's very basic.
And when you mean by stress, it doesn't necessarily mean I feel stressed out today, work was stressful today. It's any stress, whether it's the typical cold or waking up and rushing to work, or what?
Sleep deprivation.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, all those things definitely affect you. And what's interesting is, even like pre-bariatric patients, depending on where you're getting kind of your preoperative care, we oftentimes check a whole slew, like a whole panel of vitamins. And more often than not, people are deficient in many of them before bariatric surgery. And then once you get bariatric surgery, then again, you're 10 steps behind the ball, because now you're having malabsorption issues. So it is very important that you're kind of well balanced. Now, normal people, even when they're not stressed, will take multivitamins all the time. And really, if you have an intact intestine where you have normal absorption, normal digestion, for the most part, as long as you're not starting off with any nutritional deficiencies, as long as you're having a well-balanced diet, for the most part, the majority of people don't need to take a supplement. Okay, so my pearls of wisdom tip number 2 is really try to avoid the mindless eating, the grazing, and the binging. So really try to pay attention to hunger signals, because we are literally always grazing. Everywhere we go, there's food everywhere. You can't go to a meeting at work without food being there, because that's what really attracts people to come to the meeting. And so particularly when people are stuck at home and self-quarantined, it's literally like every time I walk past the pantry or the fridge, I open it up thinking like, what's going to be in here? I know.
And you're like, darn it, celery.
But, because we're in a confined space, it is difficult to say, you know what, I'm seriously not hungry. And we don't even recognize those hunger signals anymore. I have a lot of patients where I say, do you feel hungry? And they look at me and they say, what does that feel like? Because we're literally just so used to eating. We're so used to having our meals at X, Y, and Z time. And that's it. And so we don't even know what it feels like anymore. So really try to keep your mind and body busy, limit eating while watching TV and kind of grazing mindlessly, and really just try to set dedicated times for eating, like sitting down for meals, not walking around and just constantly munching on stuff.
And just not even having those trigger foods or comfort foods in the house. I mean, if I have anything that's unhealthy in my place, like I'll eat it when I'm bored. So like, I just don't even buy it, because otherwise it's there when I'm bored.
Exactly. So it's all about setting yourself up for success. Don't make this harder, or don't make it harder on yourself than it has to be. Okay. So my pearls of wisdom tip number 3 is, if you want to feel well, you need to eat well. It's not just about surviving. It's about truly thriving. So we're going to end with this hashtag dump the junk. So I pose this challenge to all of you to raid your pantry, donate the processed food to those that have no food, and really try to replace it with nutrient-dense foods and liquids, and tag hashtag dump the junk on social media to share your success. So just because you may be quarantined, now is truly an opportunity. It's quarantine to get healthy. So stay tuned, stay healthy. Knowledge is life. Thank you all so much for joining us. Remember that superfoods are just a fancy term for fruits, vegetables, good lean protein that has a lot of nutrients. It is nothing new, okay? So as long as you stick to eating good, healthy, real food, that's really the best way to improve the biodiversity in your microbiome and really help to boost your immune system.
Michelle, a really quick point that I want to make, or a question rather that I want to pose. When you say real food, I'm afraid that some people will think, well, if I cook in the kitchen and I make myself some real nice lasagna, is that real food?
Yeah. So, that is a good question because technically that is real food. So yeah,
It's home prepared mood. I mean, it's home, prepared food, but
yeah,
that doesn't
I
mean.
would say it depends on what your dietary restrictions, your dietary preferences are, whether you're vegan, vegetarian, you're trying to go keto, whether you're doing intermittent fasting, that totally depends. So it's going to be variable. But for the most part, in general, the majority of your calories should be coming from low carbohydrate, low sugar vegetables, a little bit of fruit if you're not doing keto, and lean protein. And by lean protein, that can be vegan, vegetarian, or you're a meat eater. All of those you can still get lean protein, because if you're vegan, you can still have soy products like tofu or edamame or beans. If you're vegetarian, you can still have egg whites. If you're keto, you can still have chicken and fish.
Bacon.
What?
Bacon.
So, that is all real food. But again, that's very hard for people, and that may be asking a lot right now. But, when people say, how do I protect myself during this pandemic? We again focus on, avoiding the spread and avoiding getting the virus. But we really should be putting more focus on, if we do get it, how are we going to protect ourselves and really try to improve our chance of recovery.
I'm feeling that vibe, taking accountability for our own health to set ourselves up for success in the kitchen and in our immune system and in recovery.
Yeah, because particularly at this point, when we feel out of control, this is something that we can take full control over. And I think that's very empowering.
Yeah. Well, I feel empowered.
Good.
I'm going to go wash off some more raspberries and blackberries.
All right. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Tune in tomorrow. Amy, what are we talking about tomorrow?
Tomorrow, we will have Aaron Sullivan and Jen Lee talking about how to be your own advocate as a patient. They've both been patients within the healthcare system. Both are survivors of cancer. They have firsthand experience on how do you ask those questions? How do you advocate for yourself? Whether you have cancer, any other chronic disease, or even an acute illness, how do you advocate for yourself? Tomorrow.
Awesome. Thank you all for joining, and cheerio.
Cheerio.